All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, like I said in the teacher message video, I want to talk with you for a few minutes about the major battles of the Civil War. I want to go ahead and review that just to give us a big picture view of how we got from the firing on Fort Sumter to the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. And I want to be able to do that just in case some of you were confused while you were reading the slides that I asked you to read in the Choose Your Own Adventure lessons about the Civil War. So I want to make sure that I just talk about it one last time so that you guys are all on the same page with me. So, like I just said, the start of the Civil War happened in Fort Sumter, at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. So the South Carolina militia, after seceding from the Union and declaring itself independent from the Union, marches to Fort Sumter and fires on Fort Sumter to get Union forces out of South Carolina. As a result of that, as obviously this is an act of aggression, the United States has no choice. They are forced to declare war on the Confederacy, and thus began the Civil War. Now, it takes a couple of months for the Union and the Confederacy to build up their army, to decide who's going to lead, and all of that sort of stuff. So a couple months later, in July of 1861, you have the Battle of Bull Run. This is the first major battle of the Civil War. Now, both sides thought that the war was going to end quickly, and none more so than the Union. The Union thought that they were going to march down to Virginia, put down this rebellion, and everything was going to go back to the way that it was. So much so, they felt this so much so, not only the Union Army itself, but the people that lived in the North and the people that were part of the Union, civilian, government officials, everybody, were so sure that this war was going to end quickly that you actually had people show up to Manassas Creek, where the first Battle of Bull Run was fought, showed up to Manassas Creek with picnic baskets and were going to spectate it like it was a football game or a soccer game or something like that, or a hockey game or whatever. Ultimately, they realized, oh, no, this is actually a heck of a lot more dangerous than we thought. People are actually dying. We got to get out of here. And at the same time that many of those civilian picnickers are trying to leave, the North is being shoved off the battlefield by the Confederacy and forced off the battlefield. Excuse me, sorry, guys. Forced off the battlefield and losing the Battle of Bull Run. And ultimately, the Union loses the Battle of Bull Run and is forced to retreat with many of the spectators that showed up to watch the Battle of Bull Run, the first Battle of Bull Run. Excuse me. So this is a very decisive victory for the Confederacy, and ultimately it is going to show the Union that this is going to be a much, much longer war than they thought it was going to be. Early on, and early in the Civil War, the South is actually able to defeat the North. Even though the North has more people, it has factories that can produce more supplies that were needed for the war effort. Even though they have all of those things, the South has better commanders and better military leaders. And in the beginning of the Civil War, that is going to be an advantage that is going to help the South and help the Confederacy immensely. So early on, the Confederacy is able to win more battles than the North, which is why the answer to Monday's check for learning, was it Monday's? No, I'm sorry. It was last week. It was last Thursday's check for learning. The reason that the answer to that check for learning was that the South was winning was because they were winning more battles. Now, if you also said that they had less casualties, that was also a correct answer. That was also proof that I would accept. But to say anything like the North was winning because they had more factories or anything like that, or the South was winning because they had, or the South was more successful because they had more cotton or anything like that, that doesn't really answer the question. You need to focus on who was winning more of the battles or who had less casualties. That's how you get that answer right. Okay? So, early on, the South is able to winning the Civil War, and they're defeating the North by superior military tactics and better generals. They are able to defeat the North in battle after battle. So until you get to the Battle of Antietam. Now, the Confederacy does try to march up and comes close to Washington, D.C., and they are forced back. But for the most part, the South is able to win the majority of the battles. Until you get to the Battle of Antietam, which is going to be a major battle. Now, this is not the turning point of the war. We'll get to that battle. But Antietam is going to be a setback for the Confederacy and actually going to be an advantage for the Union. And let me explain why that is. So, Robert E. Lee believes that if he can make his way north, he will gain some supplies that he needs. It will be kind of a morale killer for the Union, and it will hurt the morale of the Union. And it might also bring British and French troops into the war on the side of the South. So Robert E. Lee wants to take the battle to the Union. He wants to move up into Northern Territory. And so he moves up, and he is met at Antietam. And ultimately, Robert E. Lee loses this battle, and this is considered the single bloodiest day of the war. This is a one-day battle, and it is the single bloodiest day. 24,000 Americans die in one day. That is what Antietam is known for. It's the single bloodiest day of the war. And it kind of dashes the hopes of the Confederacy to be able to bring British and French troops, British and French support into the Civil War. But it also kind of kills the idea that they can go on the offensive. They now have to go back to their original strategy of being defensive and not being able to attack the North. The other thing that it does, there is one other important thing that the Battle of Antietam does. It gives Abraham Lincoln the confidence to start writing and start getting it through Congress, the Emancipation Proclamation. So this allows Lincoln to start writing it and to spread the idea that slavery should be completely and totally ended. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation is only going to free the slaves in the Confederate States because Lincoln knows that if he frees slaves in the border states, the slave states that are still part of the Union, they're going to go to the Confederacy, and that just adds to the numbers of soldiers that the Confederacy will have. And at the same time, Washington, D.C. is in Maryland, which is a border state and a slave state. So if Maryland goes to the Confederate side, you have the capital of the Union surrounded by Confederate territory, and that's not something you can have. So because of that, he does not want to take and have the Emancipation Proclamation free slaves in border states. He wants to keep them loyal to the Union. So originally, the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in the Confederate States. And the Battle of Antietam makes that possible. And the reason that the Emancipation Proclamation is incredibly important is because it changes the momentum and the view of the war. So if you guys are wondering some of the ways that it changed the momentum of the war and changed the war from that check for learning we had on Monday, these are the acceptable reasons, and these are the reasons I was looking for. The main one that a lot of you guys said was that the Emancipation Proclamation changed the focus of the war, and it went from preserving the Union to ending slavery. The other one you guys used a lot of was that freed slaves could now join the Union Army to fight. They could become soldiers in the Union Army. That was also an acceptable answer, and that was also one I was looking for. Some of you also mentioned that it prevented England and France from joining the Civil War on the side of the South. That was also correct. That was 100% true. And the Emancipation Proclamation did that because it changed the reason for fighting from preserving the Union, excuse me, sorry guys, to ending slavery. It made it a moral issue and made the reason that the Union was fighting a moral reason. And by joining the war on the South, on the side of the South, Britain and France would have basically been saying that slavery was okay at that point. And that was not something that they agreed with, and it was not something that they could take and have the world believe. So therefore, because of that, they did not join the Civil War on the side of the South. So it stopped and prevented Britain or France from entering the war. And the last thing it did was it paved the way for the 13th Amendment. So it freed the slaves in the Confederate States. But if the Union won, pretty much it was common knowledge that if you end slavery in the South, you're not going to allow it to continue in the rest of the United States where it's less popular. So it's obvious to many that Lincoln is looking to eventually end slavery altogether. And the Emancipation Proclamation begins that journey and begins that path towards the 13th Amendment, which is going to end slavery. So that's why Antietam is important, and that's why the Emancipation Proclamation is important. Now, the turning point battle of the Civil War was the Battle of Gettysburg. This is the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. The most Americans are going to die in this battle, but it is going to be the turning point of the Civil War. Robert E. Lee is going to try one more time to make his way into Northern Territory and to take the fight to the North. He's also running low on supplies, and he knows the North has excess supplies and has a lot of supplies like shoes and food and clothing and everything that his men might need. So Lee is trying to invade the North to get those supplies and really kind of take the fight to the North and really kind of change the momentum of how the Civil War is going at this point. The Battle of Gettysburg is fought over 3 days, and ultimately the Union comes out on top, and the Union is able to defeat the Confederacy. And this is the last time that the Confederacy is going to make its way north and take any fighting of the Civil War into Northern Territory. 2 years later, the Civil War is going to end. So that is the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg is the turning point of the Civil War. Okay? The Battle of Vicksburg. Now, all the battles we've been talking about so far, Bull Run, Antietam, Gettysburg, those were fought in the eastern half of the United States. They're fought around Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, those areas. The Battle of Vicksburg is fought along the Mississippi River, and it's fought to gain control over the Mississippi River. Okay? So if the Union can gain control of the Mississippi River, Texas and other slave states to the west and other slave territories to the west can no longer take west of the Mississippi, can no longer take and send troops and have support from the eastern part of the Confederacy. They will be on their own. So, and they will have to fight this war on their own. So that becomes a major goal of the Union at the beginning of the war. And ultimately, the Battle of Vicksburg is the final battle that will decide who has control and whether the Union can gain control of the Mississippi River. Ultimately, Ulysses S. Grant is able to lay siege to Vicksburg and ultimately force Vicksburg to surrender. And the Union is able to take control of the Mississippi River, effectively ending major battles in the Western theater of the Civil War. Okay? So Vicksburg is a major, major battle, and it's a major deciding factor in the war in the West. And it weakens the Confederacy a bit when Grant is able to win the Battle of Vicksburg. Ultimately, that is going to be Grant's kind of audition to command and lead men in the Civil War. Once Grant wins that battle, Lincoln ultimately sees the commander he is looking for and the general he is looking for, and Lincoln brings Grant to the Eastern Theater to fight Robert E. Lee, which is ultimately going to be a benefit for the Union Army and is going to give them something that they have been sorely lacking, which is leadership and a military commander that is effective and can lead and really kind of stand toe to toe against Robert E. Lee, who is the best military commander at that time. So the Battle of Vicksburg does a lot for the Union. Now, the final battle that I want to talk about is Appomattox Courthouse. So after Gettysburg, things kind of go downhill for the Confederacy. And ultimately, when Grant takes over, him and William Tecumseh Sherman, his right-hand man, begin to really take the war to the South. And they begin to kind of encircle Virginia and kind of try to isolate Virginia by kind of taking over the other southern states and really kind of defeating the other southern states and the other Confederate states until ultimately Virginia and Richmond are the only ones really left. So Sherman does this by marching his army to the Atlantic Ocean all the way from Georgia, Mississippi area. And as Georgia, Mississippi area. And as he's marching, he is burning everything that he sees. He is destroying railroads. He's destroying their resources, while Grant is occupying Lee and preventing Lee from supporting and defending the South against Sherman. So Grant is able to preoccupy Lee. Sherman is forcing the other states and the other parts of the Confederacy to surrender. And then eventually, Robert E. Lee is cornered at Appomattox Courthouse, and he is forced to surrender the Confederacy and admit defeat and admit that the Civil War is over and that the Confederacy has been defeated. So that is the significance of Appomattox Courthouse. It is where the Confederacy surrenders and where the Civil War ends. So that is the final battle of the Civil War. So that's kind of a summary of the Civil War, just a summary of the major battles. If you have any questions, guys, please reach out to me during my office hours, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. With that said, guys, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will hopefully see you guys next year, and I hope you guys really thoroughly enjoy your summer. Have a great day, guys. Have a great summer.